Sometimes the safest place in the world is a car where no one asks you who you're supposed to be. Claire Whitmore didn't plan to get in that car. Not really. Not after the kind of day that left her voice sharp and her patience thinner than the glass walls of her office. But the city was loud. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, and the silence between meetings had started to feel heavier than the meetings themselves. So when the black sedan pulled up under the soft flicker of a street lamp, she stepped in without looking twice, heels clicking once against the pavement before the door shut. Behind her with a muted thud, sealing her inside a space that smelled faintly of clean leather and something warmer, like coffee that had long gone cold but still lingered in the air. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror just once, not long enough to study, just enough to acknowledge, his eyes steady, unreadable, then back to the road. "Good evening," he said, voice low, even, the kind of tone that didn't try to fill space. And she nodded without answering, already pulling her phone from her bag as the screen lit up with missed calls, unread emails, a calendar that looked more like a battlefield than a schedule. "Take Lexington," she said quickly, sharper than she intended. "And don't take the tunnel. Traffic's worse this time of night." The man nodded again. No argument, no correction, just a slight adjustment of the wheel as the car eased into motion, smooth, controlled. Like it had done this 1,000 times before, Claire leaned back against the seat, one hand pressed to her temple, thumb scrolling through messages she didn't want to read, voices from earlier still echoing in her head, board members questioning, investors pushing, everyone wanting something. Always something. Her phone buzzed again, and she answered this time. "I said I'll handle it," she snapped, eyes closing briefly. "No, not tomorrow, tonight." Her voice cut through the quiet of the car, sharp edges scraping against something softer that refused to push back. The driver didn't react, didn't shift, didn't even glance in the mirror this time, just kept driving, hands steady on the wheel. The city lights sliding across his face in brief, passing streaks, red, gold, white, gone. Claire ended the call with a frustrated exhale and dropped the phone into her lap. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It wasn't awkward. It didn't press on her chest the way silence usually did. It just stayed, like it had weight, but no demand. She noticed then the radio was off, not abruptly, not recently, just absent, as if it had never been on to begin with. The temperature inside the car was just cool enough to keep her awake. The faint hum of the engine steady beneath it all. She shifted slightly, adjusting her coat, and realized something else. The driver hadn't asked her a single question, not, "How was your day?" Not, "Long night." Not even the usual polite small talk that always felt like an obligation she didn't have time for. He just drove, present without intrusion, and for a moment, Claire didn't know what to do with that. Her hand hovered over her phone again, then stopped. Fingers resting against the screen before slowly pulling away. She let her head fall back against the seat, eyes drifting closed, just for a second, just enough to feel the difference between being watched and being left alone. Outside, the city kept moving, horns in the distance, footsteps on sidewalks, lives colliding and separating in patterns she usually controlled from a distance. But inside that car, none of it reached her the same way. It softened, dulled, like the world had been turned down just enough for her to hear her own breathing, steady, quiet, real, and the man in the front seat, Marcus Reed, though she didn't know his name yet, adjusted the rearview mirror just slightly, not to look at her, but to angle the glare of passing headlights away from her face, a small movement, almost invisible, the kind no one ever noticed, and he said nothing about it. Didn't need to, because sometimes, silence did more than words ever could. The car moved through the city like it was not in a hurry to arrive anywhere. Each stoplight stretching a little longer than expected, each turn taken with a kind of quiet intention that Claire could not quite explain. She opened her eyes again when the glow of a passing storefront brushed across the inside of the car, soft amber light catching the edge of the dashboard, then disappearing just as quickly. Her phone buzzed once more in her lap, insistent, demanding. The name on the screen, one she usually answered before the second ring. But this time she only stared at it, thumb hovering, then slowly pressing the side button until the screen went dark. The silence that followed felt different now, not something she was escaping into, but something that was holding steady around her. She shifted in her seat, adjusting the strap of her bag, her shoulders dropping just slightly, as if something invisible had been set down without her noticing. Up front, Marcus kept his eyes on the road, the rhythm of driving settling into something almost instinctive. He noticed the change in the air without turning, the kind of shift that did not need words to be understood. The tension that had filled the car when she first got in had softened. Not gone, but quieter, like a storm that had moved further out to sea. He eased off the accelerator just a touch as they approached a long stretch of road lined with darkened storefronts and scattered streetlights, the city thinning out as they moved uptown. Claire glanced out the window, watching her own reflection ghost across the glass between passing lights. She looked composed, as she always did, but there was something in her eyes that did not match the rest, something tired in a way. Sleep could not fix. She let out a slow breath, barely audible, and for the first time that night, she did not reach for anything to distract herself. No screen, no call, no list to manage, just the quiet hum of the engine and the steady motion forward. Marcus reached toward the center console without looking, fingers brushing lightly against a small control before dimming the dashboard lights just enough to take the edge off the brightness. The glow softened, easier on the eyes, less demanding. He did it the same way he did everything else, without announcement, without expectation, just a small adjustment made for someone who might need it. Claire noticed, not the movement itself, but the result, the way the space around her seemed to settle even further. She leaned her head back again, this time letting it rest fully against the seat, her breathing slower now, more even, the kind that came when there was finally nothing immediate pressing in. Outside, a siren passed in the distance, fading quickly, the city continuing its constant motion without asking anything of her in that moment. Minutes passed like that, uncounted, uninterrupted, until the quiet felt almost unfamiliar in its steadiness. Claire spoke then, her voice softer than before, not sharp, not controlled, just there. "Do you always drive this late?" she asked, the question simple, almost unnecessary. Marcus considered it for a brief second before answering. "Most nights," he said, his tone the same as before, calm, unforced. "It is quieter," he added after a moment, not as an explanation, just a fact. Claire nodded slightly, even though he could not see it, her gaze returning to the window. "Yeah," she said, almost to herself. "It is," and the words settled between them without needing anything else. No follow-up, no conversation built around it. Just two people sharing the same space, the same silence, without trying to change it, and for reasons she could not quite name. Claire felt something loosen inside her chest, something she had been holding tight for longer than she realized. Not fixed, not solved, just given room. And for the first time that day, that was enough. The road stretched longer than Claire expected, not in distance but in feeling, like time inside the car had shifted into something softer, less urgent. She glanced toward the navigation screen briefly, noticing the route was not the fastest one she would have taken herself, not the sharpest turns or the most efficient cuts through traffic, but she did not say anything, not this time, because for once, arriving later did not feel like losing control. It felt like being given something she had not asked for but quietly needed. Marcus kept his pace steady, hands relaxed on the wheel, his posture unchanged, but his awareness tuned to the small details most people overlooked, the way her breathing had evened out, the way her shoulders no longer held that rigid line of tension, the way silence had settled into something almost protective. He had seen it before, not often, but enough to recognize when someone stopped bracing against the world for a moment, and he knew better than to interrupt it. The city lights outside grew less crowded as they moved further away from the center, buildings giving way to quieter blocks, trees lining the sidewalks, streetlights spaced wider apart, each one casting a soft circle of light that the car passed through like a rhythm. Claire watched those lights without really focusing, her mind drifting in a way it had not been allowed to all day. Thoughts coming slower now, less sharp, less demanding. She became aware of the sound of the tires against the road, the subtle shift when the car changed lanes, the faint click of the turn signal, all the small things she usually never noticed because she was always somewhere else mentally, always ahead, always planning, always solving. But here, in that moving space, there was nothing to solve. Marcus reached forward again, this time adjusting the airflow slightly, directing it away from the back seat just enough to keep the temperature balanced without creating a draft. It was a small correction, instinctive, the kind that came from paying attention without making it obvious. Claire pulled her coat a little closer around herself, then relaxed again, her hand resting loosely in her lap, fingers no longer curled around her phone. She spoke after a while, her voice quieter than before, almost uncertain. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked, not specifying what she meant. The driving, the nights, the repetition. Marcus did not rush to answer. He let the question sit for a second, considering it not as something to respond to quickly, but as something to answer honestly. "Sometimes," he said, his tone even. "But it depends on the night," he added. And that was all. No explanation, no complaint, just a simple truth left open. Claire nodded again, this time a little more noticeable, her gaze shifting from the window to the back of his seat, not really looking at him, but aware of his presence in a way that felt different now, less like a service, more like a quiet anchor in the space. She let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh, but did not quite make it. "I do not remember the last time I had a night that felt like this," she said, more to the air than to him. Marcus heard it. Of course he did. But he did not respond, not because he did not care, but because he understood that some words were not meant to be answered. They were meant to be allowed. The car slowed as they approached a long red light, the glow washing over the interior in a soft, steady hue. Claire looked down at her hands, then back up again, and for a brief moment, she did not recognize the person she had been just an hour ago, the one who had stepped into this car carrying the weight of everything, pressing it into every word, every movement, every breath. Now that weight had not disappeared, but it had shifted, redistributed in a way that made it easier to carry. The light turned green, the car moved forward again, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said, not yet, not in a space that had already given more than most conversations ever could. The car continued forward with a quiet certainty, as if it understood that this stretch of road was not just about distance, but about time. Claire noticed the familiar skyline beginning to reappear in the distance, taller buildings rising again, lights sharper, more deliberate, the city returning to its usual shape, and with it came a subtle shift in her chest, not tightness exactly, but awareness. Like the moment before stepping back into a role she had momentarily set aside, she sat a little straighter without thinking, her fingers brushing lightly against her phone again, not picking it up, just confirming it was still there, still waiting. Marcus noticed the change the same way he noticed everything else, not by looking directly, but by feeling the rhythm of the space adjust. The silence was still there, but it had changed tone, less like shelter now, and more like something she was preparing to leave. He eased the car into a slower lane as they approached a busier intersection, giving the moment just a little more room, the kind of choice no one would question, but that still mattered. Claire glanced at the navigation again, this time more consciously, recognizing the route, realizing they were closer than she expected, or maybe exactly as close as they needed to be. She let out a small breath, her gaze drifting once more to the window where her reflection returned, clearer, now under brighter lights, composed, controlled, the version of herself the world knew. But behind it, something quieter lingered, something that had not been there when she first got in. She hesitated, then spoke again, her voice steady but softer than the person she had been earlier that night. "You could have taken the faster route," she said, not accusing, not even questioning, just stating it. Marcus nodded slightly. "I still on the road?" "Yes," he said simply, nothing more, no defense, no explanation offered. The answer sat between them, open, and Claire felt it, the absence of justification, the lack of any attempt to impress or excuse. It was not carelessness, it was intention without announcement. She looked down at her hands again, then back up. "I did not mind," she added after a moment, the words coming out quieter than she expected. Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging without turning it into something larger. The car slowed again as they turned onto a street lined with trees and evenly spaced townhouses, the kind of place where everything looked ordered, predictable, controlled. Claire recognized it instantly, her street, her world, waiting exactly as she had left it, but she did not feel the same walking back into it as she usually did. Something in her hesitated, not resistance, just a pause. Marcus pulled the car smoothly toward the curb in front of her building. The engine still running, the soft hum filling the space one last time. Neither of them moved right away. The moment stretched, quiet but not uncomfortable. Claire reached for her bag slowly, fingers brushing the handle before stopping. She looked forward, not at him, but at the space between them, and asked, almost without thinking, "Do you ever feel like people only hear you when you are talking?" The question hung there. Unexpected, heavier than the ones before. Marcus did not answer immediately. He let the silence hold it first, then said, calm and steady, "Sometimes people hear more when you are not." Claire blinked, the words settling in a way that did not need to be explained. She nodded once, slowly, as if agreeing with something she had not realized she believed. Outside, the lights of her building glowed warm and steady, a place she had always returned to without hesitation. But tonight, she stayed in her seat just a moment longer, breathing in the quiet one last time before stepping back into everything waiting beyond the door. Claire's hand finally closed around the handle of her bag, but she did not open the door, not yet. Her eyes lingered forward, fixed somewhere between the windshield and the quiet reflection of herself in it, as if stepping out would mean stepping back into something she was not fully ready to carry again. Marcus remained still in the front seat, hands resting lightly on the wheel, the engine idling in a low, steady rhythm. He did not turn, did not check the mirror, did not shift to signal the end of the ride. He simply stayed, allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace. Claire exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried more than just air, then reached forward and opened the door, the outside world meeting her immediately with a rush of cooler night air and distant city noise, softer here, but still present. She stepped out, heels touching the pavement with a quiet, measured sound, the door closing behind her with a gentle click that felt louder than it should have. She stood there for a second, one hand resting against the edge of the door before letting it fall to her side. The building in front of her looked the same as always, tall, polished, every window lit with intention, a place where everything was expected of her the moment she walked in. She adjusted her coat, her posture instinctively straightening, but something in her hesitated. She turned back toward the car, not quickly, not dramatically, just a simple motion, and for the first time she looked directly through the glass at Marcus. He met her gaze in the rearview mirror, calm, steady, nothing added to the moment. No question in his eyes, no expectation, just presence. Claire opened her mouth slightly as if to say something, then stopped. The words she was used to using did not seem to fit here, not in this space that had never asked anything from her. She gave a small nod instead, subtle but real, and said, "Thank you." The words quiet, without the usual distance she kept in her voice. Marcus inclined his head just slightly in return. "You are welcome," he said. Simple, even, the way he had said everything else. Claire lingered another second, then turned and walked toward the entrance of her building, her steps steady but slower than usual, the glass doors opening automatically as she approached, swallowing her into the warm, controlled environment inside. But even as she moved forward, something of that quiet stayed with her. Marcus watched only until the doors closed behind her, then shifted his gaze back to the road ahead, his hand moving to the gear without hurry. He checked the mirror once more, not for her, but out of habit, then pulled away from the curb smoothly, the car merging back into the quiet flow of the street, leaving no trace of the moment except the space it had briefly held. Inside the building, Claire crossed the lobby, her heels echoing softly against the polished floor, a familiar sound that usually marked the return to control, but tonight it felt different, less like armor and more like something she could choose to wear or set aside. She paused near the elevator, her hand hovering over the button, then lowering again. She glanced down at her phone, still dark, still silent, and for once, she did not rush to wake it. Instead, she stood there, just for a moment, letting the quiet follow her all the way inside, carrying something she could not name, but knew she did not want to lose. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but Claire did not step in right away. She stood there watching the empty space inside as if it required a decision she was not ready to make. The quiet from the car had followed her further than she expected, settling into the edges of her thoughts, slowing everything down just enough to make her aware of how fast she usually moved. A man in a suit passed behind her, glancing briefly before stepping around to press the button himself. The doors began to close, and she instinctively reached out, stopping them, then stepped inside without a word. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, composed, precise, every detail in place. But her eyes held something softer now, something less guarded. The elevator began to rise, each floor marked by a soft tone, steady, predictable. She leaned back slightly, her shoulders touching the cool metal behind her, and for a moment she allowed herself to just stand there without preparing for what came next. Her phone buzzed again, the vibration echoing faintly in the enclosed space. She looked down at it, the screen lighting up with urgency she knew too well, but instead of answering, she pressed it into silence once more. Her reflection watched her do it, almost unfamiliar in that small act of refusal, when the doors opened on her floor. The hallway greeted her with the same polished quiet, soft lighting, muted carpet, everything designed to feel controlled. She walked down the corridor, her heels quieter now against the floor, each step measured but not rushed. When she reached her door, she paused, keys in hand, the small metal weight resting between her fingers. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as she left it, clean, organized, untouched, the kind of place that looked complete but felt empty when no one else was there. She set her bag down on the console table, the sound soft but distinct in the silence. Her coat followed, draped carefully over the back of a chair, habits she had built over years, automatic, efficient. She moved toward the kitchen, then stopped halfway, as if she had forgotten why. The quiet in the apartment was different from the quiet in the car. This one felt larger, less contained, and for a second, she almost reached for something to fill it. Music, television, anything, but she did not. Instead, she stood there, letting it exist without interruption. Her mind drifted back without effort, not to the meetings, not to the calls, but to the steady rhythm of the road, the dimmed lights, the absence of pressure to respond. She walked slowly to the window, looking out over the city, the same skyline she had seen countless times, but tonight it felt slightly distant, as if she was no longer fully inside it. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass again, and she studied it, not critically, not strategically, just observing. Her hand moved to the edge of the window frame, fingers resting there, grounding herself in the moment. She realized then that nothing had actually changed about her circumstances. Her responsibilities were still waiting, her decisions still mattered, her world had not shifted, and yet something inside her had, something subtle but real. The tension that usually followed her into every room had not come with her this time. It lingered somewhere outside, left behind in a space that had never asked her to carry it. She exhaled slowly, a quiet release that seemed to settle deeper than before, and for the first time in a long while, she did not feel the need to immediately fix the silence around her. She simply stood there, letting it stay, knowing without fully understanding why that this time. It was not something to escape from. It was something she could keep. Morning arrived without the usual sharp edge, the light filtering through Claire's window softer than it had any right to be. Or maybe she was noticing it differently. She woke before her alarm, eyes opening slowly as if her body had decided it no longer needed to be forced into the day. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar rush of thoughts to flood in, the list of tasks, the weight of expectations, the urgency that usually greeted her before her feet even touched the floor, but it did not come all at once this time. It came in pieces, slower, quieter, like a conversation that had learned to lower its voice. She turned her head slightly, the city visible through the wide glass windows, already moving, already alive, but it felt distant in a way that did not unsettle her. She sat up, pushing the covers back with a small, deliberate motion, her feet finding the floor. Cool and steady beneath her, she moved through her routine without rushing, brushing her hair, selecting clothes, each action done with the same precision she always had, but without the tightness that used to sit behind it. Her phone lay on the bedside table, screen dark, waiting. She picked it up, held it for a second, then set it back down again, choosing the quiet just a little longer. In the kitchen, she poured herself coffee, black, the scent rising in a familiar way. She leaned against the counter, cup in hand, not checking emails, not opening messages, just standing there as the steam curled upward and disappeared. It was a small moment, insignificant by every standard she had ever lived by, and yet it felt like something she had been missing without knowing it. Across the city, Marcus Reed was already on the road, the early morning hours quieter than the night, but carrying a different kind of stillness, the kind that came before everything began again. He had dropped off 2 passengers already, short rides, no conversation, just the steady rhythm of driving. He stopped at a red light, hands resting lightly on the wheel, his eyes moving briefly to the rearview mirror out of habit, seeing nothing but the empty back seat. Clean, undisturbed, he adjusted it slightly, not because it needed it, but because it was what he did. Small corrections, quiet maintenance. He did not think about the night before in any deliberate way, but something of it remained, the same way certain moments stayed. Without asking for attention, Claire finished her coffee and set the cup down, the sound soft against the counter. She walked back toward her phone, this time picking it up and unlocking the screen. The messages flooded in immediately, calls missed, emails stacked, the world returning to its usual volume. She scanned them quickly, her mind shifting back into motion, but something in her response had changed. She did not react as sharply, did not let each notification pull at her in the same way. She chose what to answer, what to leave, what could wait, a small shift, almost invisible from the outside, but real. She moved toward the door, gathering her things, slipping into her shoes, her reflection in the hallway mirror catching her eye once more, composed, ready, the version of herself the world expected. But this time there was something else there too, something quieter, steadier, not replacing who she was, but grounding it. She stepped out into the hallway, locking the door behind her, and as she walked toward the elevator, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she was not bracing herself for the day ahead. She was simply stepping into it, carrying with her a silence that no one else could see, but that changed everything about how it felt. The office building rose above the street like it always had, glass and steel reflecting a city that never slowed down. Claire stepped through the revolving doors and into the lobby where everything moved with quiet efficiency, heels clicking, voices low, the rhythm of ambition carried in every step. She was used to this space, used to the way people straightened slightly when they saw her, the way conversations shifted just enough to acknowledge her presence. But today she moved through it differently, not slower, not uncertain, just not pulled by it in the same way. The elevator arrived almost instantly, doors opening with that familiar chime. She stepped inside with 2 others, a junior analyst and a manager she recognized, both offering polite greetings. She nodded in return, composed, professional, the version of her they expected, but she did not fill the silence that followed, did not ask questions or make conversation to occupy the space. She simply stood there, letting the quiet exist without needing to control it, and something subtle shifted in the air, not uncomfortable, just different, the kind of silence people notice when they are not used to it. The doors opened on her floor, and she stepped out, moving down the hallway toward her office, assistants already waiting with updates, schedules, decisions that needed to be made. "You have a call with the board in 15 minutes, one of them said, keeping pace beside her, "and the Henderson deal needs your approval before noon." Claire listened, nodding once, taking in the information without the usual urgency tightening her expression. "Reschedule the board call to 30 minutes later," she said calmly, her voice steady, not sharp. "And send me the Henderson file. I will review it first." The assistant blinked slightly, surprised by the change in tone more than the instruction, then nodded and moved quickly to follow through. Claire entered her office, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The room was exactly as she left it, organized, controlled, a space built for decisions. She set her bag down, placed her phone on the desk, and instead of immediately opening it, she walked to the window, looking out over the city that stretched in every direction, alive with motion, expectation, noise. She stood there for a moment, letting it all exist without stepping into it right away, her reflection faintly visible in the glass again. She studied it briefly, then looked past it, back to the world beyond. When she returned to her desk, she sat down and picked up the first file, flipping it open, her focus sharp, precise, the way it always had been. But there was something different in how she moved through it. She did not rush, did not let the pressure dictate her pace. She read, considered, made notes, each decision deliberate rather than reactive. The phone rang. She glanced at it, then answered, her voice calm, measured. Yes, she said, listening without interrupting, without cutting in to take control immediately. The person on the other end paused slightly, adjusting to the space she left for them, and in that space, something unexpected happened. They explained more clearly, more honestly. Without being pushed, Claire responded simply, directly, not needing to dominate the conversation to lead it. And as the call ended, she realized something she had never considered before. That silence was not the absence of control. It was a different kind of it. One that did not force, did not demand, but still shaped everything around it. She leaned back slightly in her chair, the thought settling in quietly, not as a revelation, but as something that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. And for the first time in a long time, the room did not feel like something she had to fill. It felt like something she could allow. By the time the sun began to lower behind the skyline, the city outside Claire's office shifted again, lights softening, shadows stretching across the glass, the kind of transition most people barely noticed. But today she did. She had worked through meetings, decisions, conversations that once would have drained her completely, and yet something in her remained steady, not untouched, but not consumed either. The silence she carried had not disappeared under the weight of the day. It had stayed. Quieter now, woven into the way she listened, the way she spoke, the way she paused before responding. Her assistant stepped in with the final update of the afternoon, voice careful. "The car is ready whenever you are." Claire looked up from her desk, the words landing differently than they would have just a day before. She nodded once, closing the file in front of her with a soft, deliberate motion. She stood, gathering her things without rush, her movements still precise, still controlled, but no longer driven by the need to outrun the next moment. As she walked through the office floor, people glanced up, offering small acknowledgments, some with questions in their eyes, others simply observing the shift they could not quite name. She responded with the same composed presence, but without the edge that had once defined it. The elevator ride down was quiet again, but this time she understood it differently, not as something to manage, but something to allow. When the doors opened to the lobby, the evening had settled in fully, the glass reflecting warm interior lights against the deepening blue outside. She stepped through the revolving doors and onto the sidewalk, the air cooler now, carrying the distant hum of the city winding into night. The car waited at the curb, the same black sedan, engine running low and steady. She recognized it before she even reached the door, not because of the vehicle itself, but because of the stillness around it. She opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar quiet meeting her again, unchanged. Marcus glanced once through the mirror, the same brief acknowledgement as before. "Good evening," he said. Voice even. Claire settled into the seat, her posture relaxed in a way it had not been the night before. She placed her phone beside her instead of in her hand, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The car began to move, merging into the flow of evening traffic, the city lights reflecting softly across the windshield. Claire looked out the window, then back toward the space ahead, and this time, when she spoke, there was no edge, no urgency, just something honest and unguarded. "I think I understand now," she said quietly, not needing to explain further. Marcus did not ask what she meant, did not turn the moment into a conversation. He simply nodded once, accepting the words as they were, and let the silence return, not empty, not lacking, but full in a way that did not need to be filled. The car moved forward through the city, steady, unhurried, carrying two people who did not need to say more than they already had. And in that quiet, something lasting settled into place, not a solution, not a change the world would notice, but something quieter, stronger, the kind of shift that stayed long after the